you also turn off your cameras if you're joining us remotely. And all councillors, please ensure your cameras remain on. Could I please ask Democrat? Yes, they have. Look, they've started the recording. Fantastic. Okay, so prynawn da pawb. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome along to this Learning and LGES Scrutiny Committee on Monday, the 17th of October. Please note, as I've said, this meeting is being recorded and may be broadcast via the authority's internet site. The images and sound recording may also be used for training purposes within the authority. Okay, so we'll move straight on to agenda number 1. Apologies for absence. And I've received apologies from our co-opted member, Paul Phillips. Thank you, Jane. Declarations of interest. Colleagues, can I remind you all, if you have a declaration of interest to declare, if you would do so now. I can't see anybody, so we'll continue on then to agenda item number 3, that is the Scrutiny Forward Work Programme 2022 to 2023. I'm going to give you a summary of the report, and obviously we can just continue to agree that Scrutiny Forward Work Programme for the year. It is a live document and it is flexible and therefore can be changed on the development of any Cabinet Forward Work Plan or any urgent matters that we may wish to discuss. So what we'll do is, towards the end of the meeting, when we have a reflection moment of this particular scrutiny, there may be an area that we want to come back to and discuss in relation to the Forward Work Plan. Okay, so colleagues, for those of you who were able to meet with us last week just to discuss the agenda items, as you'll know, we actually looked through the Forward Work Plan, and at that point in time, unless there's any difference today, it is still okay. Every item is still moving forward, and I'm pleased to report that we've got a number of school meetings in place to look at the current curriculum, and we have an ALN Task and Finish group as well that's going to be commencing shortly. So that will all then contribute to the Forward Work Plan as well. Colleague in the chamber has asked me to consider an item for the Forward Work Plan. It does relate to agenda item number 4 today regarding vulnerable learners provision for those educated other than at school. We commonly call that EOTAS, to consider the use of reduced timetables. And that may be that after we've discussed that agenda item, that we then discuss the Estin report as and when it's published in the future. So we may consider that as part of the Forward Work Plan. Is that okay, Jeff? Yeah, lovely, thank you. Okay, so in that case then, we'll move straight on to, sorry, are there any questions in relation to agenda item number 3? No? Any comments in relation to agenda item number 3? No? Okay, therefore we'll move straight on to agenda item number 4. As I've just said, this is to look at the vulnerable learners provision for those educated other than at school, EOTAS, and to consider the use of reduced timetables. With us today, we have our Cabinet Member for Education, Councillor Michelle Jones. Of course, we have our Chief Officer, Sue, with us, as well as Head of ALN and Inclusion, Gavin Maithrinham. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We are receiving a report on the vulnerable learners provision and how the LA monitors the use and the effectiveness of reduced timetables and the impact on learners. Colleagues, who's going to just touch upon this report for us? That's okay. So as we're just doing this hybrid system, I'll just give our Cabinet Member just a few minutes and our Cabinet Member will just introduce the report for us.
Thank you, sorry about that. The report is, right, 2 seconds, I'll get myself together here. Right, this report outlines the work and functions of the EOTAS provision in Merthyr Tydfil, specifically the work of the Pupil Referral Unit, which is also known as the PRU, and special tuition. It also examines the role, the function and the use of reduced timetables across our provisions. The definition of IOTAS has, I think, over time meant different things to different people, both here in Merthyr Tydfil and more broadly throughout Wales. And it's very possible that some of you will have strong recollections of IOTAS provision as it was in the past. Over the last 10 to 12 years, Welsh Government has helped clarify the definition and focus of IOTAS provision. It's ensured that unregistered improvements, it's ensured the registered provisions were registered and brought into a monitoring framework, as well as working with Estyn to identify good practice and support improvement where that's been needed. We know that IOTAS provision within Merthyr Tydfil is an area for development, and we identified this in our self-evaluation report for our Estyn inspection. Estyn confirmed this to us in their inspection report and have given us a platform to build on. This report sets out the context for discussion today. Whilst the number of pupils in IOTAS is relatively low, they do represent a larger than average percentage of our total pupil population. They're also without doubt some of our most needy and valuable learners. It's therefore really important that we ensure that the provision we provide for these learners is suitable for the needs, with facilities that are appropriate to ensure that they have the best opportunity to succeed in their education journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, for that overview. Okay, colleagues, you've hopefully had an opportunity to listen to what Michelle has just said and obviously have a look through the report. Therefore, can I invite some questions, please?
Right, I've gone right, have I?
Yeah. Oh. Right, Councillor Clive Tyfi.
Sorry about that. I was wondering about this independent schools. How many children have we got going to independent schools, and are they within the borough?
There we go. Push it again.
Yeah.
That's working now.
Yeah.
Sorry, new system. We're on a learning journey together on this one, aren't we? It's a good question. We have 6 pupils that are educated in independent schools. None of those schools, as a borough, we don't have any independent special schools within our borough. So they're termed out of county. But IOTAS, the way Welsh Government definition works, they ask that we include that count because we fund that placement. So we have 6 pupils that are placed in a range of provisions, largely, well, absolutely within transporting distance. So, you know, that's generally considered to be under about 50 minutes, 45, 50 minutes, and they're placed for their education needs.
Would I ask, do they go to the independent schools because they've got a specific need that we can't supply in Merthyr?
Yeah. So if I provide a little bit of background, what we have. Can I move my chair? Is that all right to move that way a little bit? Because I feel like I can't see you properly. We obviously have pupils in mainstream, and then we have learning resource spaces that then are pupils that can be educated in mainstream but need something a bit more specialist. We then have our pupil referral unit, and we have a special school Greenfield. Now, there are a small number of pupils where their identified needs can't be met within a sort of a traditional profound and multiple learning difficulty provision like Greenfield. They don't necessarily have the behaviour needs that would fit the PRU, the pupil referral unit, but their needs definitely are greater than what we would see to be manageable in a mainstream environment. So, for example, one of the schools that we use is in Penarth. It's called Headlands. It's managed and owned by Action for Children. It's run on a charitable basis. And what they cater for are pupils who have significant ASD, autism needs, but also significant behavioural needs. Now, that's a combination that we don't have, and most local authorities don't have provision for, so we access that specialist provision for that range of needs.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Tivy. Thank you, Gavin, for that. I'm going to go to Jeff Beard next, if that's okay.
Thanks, Chair. Can I refer our colleagues to item 5.8 in the report? It says a review was undertaken by Central South Consortium. And this was in 21-22, resulting in establishing an in-depth action plan, which has been rewritten several times. Can I ask where we are with this now, and what was the reason for rewriting the plan?
I'll take that one if you don't
Okay,
mind.
yeah.
The plan was needed to be rewritten after an engagement with management committee, with engagement with the leadership, and actually engagement with officers, because the plan was written by Central South Consortium. We felt that there wasn't enough of what we were doing in it, so it did need to be rewritten. It did need to be tightened up to ensure that actually the provision would move forward in a particular direction, the direction that we wanted it to go. You asked where it is now. Members will be aware that the provision has recently had and been subject to an Estin inspection. That report will be published on the 29th of November. Following that, the report will be the plan will be revised to meet the recommendations from that Estin inspection.
Thank you, Chair. 5.9, it says an adoption of a collaborative approach, etc., etc. However, there is further work to be done. Is this with all schools or just Penydray?
It's with all schools, absolutely. The connectivity with Penydray has been driven by the number of pupils that have come from that school, and therefore that connectivity back into the mainstream setting has been clear. What we're keen to do, and this comes back to the plan that Sue alluded to, we're keen to see really clear established working relationships between the PRU and all our settings, primary and secondary. Because we know that one of the elements of the plan that was in place, that was undertaken, was that it was very much focused on, rightly, teaching and learning, leadership and management. What it didn't necessarily capture was that element that is around one of the functions of the PRU, which is how do you work with that pupil to address their needs so that they can get back into school and access mainstream. Because we don't want pupils there long term. We want them to be there for a time to enable some of that therapeutic work to be done, some of that intervention work to be done, and we want to see them back into that mainstream setting. Part of that is about identifying them at the right time so that actually there's benefit in them coming into the PRU and then going back. But what we saw in the plan was that it didn't necessarily capture all those elements. So we wanted to make sure from an inclusion point of view that there was a clear plan of work for the PRU, and for the management committee to look at how do we engage with schools better, how do we ensure that pupils have their needs really clearly identified when they come out of the mainstream school, so that then you can look at the progress they're making to get them back into that mainstream setting in a way that actually the schools can acknowledge, yeah, this pupil has made progress, this pupil's needs have been looked at, have been addressed, and they are making that progress that will allow them to function back in mainstream.
Thank you, Chair. One more. Thank you. Item 5.15, please. It's quite a big paragraph, so I can give you a chance to read it. And my question is, what is the end result, and how is this able to be improved?
The end result, as in the effectiveness of the reduced timetable? Okay, fine. I think it's worth pointing out. I think it's an excellent question. The improvement part is absolutely key, and we identified that in our self-evaluation, and Nestin picked up on it very clearly in their report. we see when we think about reduced timetables, there's a range of pupil need that involves them accessing. So the number in there, 111, seems like a high number. It is a high number. Let's be honest. It's made up of a number of different groups of pupils. So some of those pupils are pupils that needed, because of their needs, a slower than normal integration into the mainstream setting, and actually just to put them into their mainstream school would have meant that it would have been difficult for them or potentially failed. So you kind of go, okay, let's ease them in. So some of that number will be pupils easing in. Some of it will be related to very clear medical needs where for a period of time they need to not be in school. Some of it will relate to areas around anxiety, which, to be honest, has been the biggest area of need that we've seen. Pupils that have just post-pandemic have just really struggled being in school. And we've had to kind of work out how do we meet their needs in a way that keeps that link with mainstream strong, but while also recognizing that they're really struggling in education of any description. So what we have is we have a process whereby we monitor all the pupils that are on tuition, specifically on a fortnightly basis. We're going to be expanding that. Well, we have expanded that work in the sense that we've employed now a family liaison officer to do some of the fundamental legwork in terms of working with the family around some of those things, but also then we'll work with the schools around that too. We're adding further capacity in a post, the safeguarding education officer post, which is part of that remit. The sort of the wider safeguarding areas will have will own that whole area of reduced timetables, the monitoring, the engagement with schools, the accountability, challenge, support, all those areas. The difference that it's made is that it's enabled pupils who have been struggling to re-engage. I suppose fundamentally, we've been able to make sure that pupils have had provision where they may not have otherwise. Hand on heart, it's not perfect. There's work to be done, and we really clearly put our hand up that we need to be better at getting the pupils back into school.
Just a quick question to your answers. Thank you. In terms of number or percentages, how successful are you in getting pupils back into mainstream education, which is the stated aim of the PRU?
In relation to, there's two elements to that. The reduced timetable operates for pupils across the whole continuum of provision. The majority of those aren't in the pupil referral unit, so they'll be on tuition or they'll just be in mainstream and needing some kind of plan. So the success is variable because for those pupils that need that slow integration, it's effective because those pupils are now in school full time. For those pupils that have medical needs that have come out because it's effective. For pupils that have got anxiety related issues, it is longer term. And that's something that we're seeing not just here in Merthyr Tydfil, but across Wales, that's proven a real challenge to local authorities and to schools as well in terms of how to engage pupils that are, they may not have CAMS involvement, but they're just really struggling to be back in school. So it's an ongoing work there. For pupils specifically relating to the PRU, it's been successful, certainly with Penedre. So to the extent that those links have been built, we're seeing good, I don't want to use the word revolving door, but we're seeing opportunities for access back in, building their access and opportunities, looking at other things that might help support them in that in terms of vocational provision and other things. So I can't give you one answer, but across the board, there's variability depending really on the complexity.
And lastly, Chair, thank you very much for your indulgence. But lastly, what you've just said to us, Gavin, is great. Can that be replicated across Avon Taff and the other schools? And if so, what information are you passing to those other schools to enable that to happen?
We've got meetings coming up with next week to actually look at how we can actually take the best practice from all the schools, because they've all got aspects of good practice that we want to replicate to ensure that we have got that across the board. What I will say, perhaps what Gavin didn't say, is once you're getting into Key Stage 4 and the children have started their GCSEs, if they then go on to a reduced timetable or to any sort of alternative curriculum, it is very difficult to get them back into full time. So what Gavin was mentioning there about bespoke packages is looking working to ensure that they get their core subjects so they can get 5 GCSEs, and then do other things that they can do well to ensure that they don't become neat and to ensure that they can move on. So that's something that we're very keen to work with all of the secondary head teachers and the PIU to ensure that. And it is a work in progress, and it does depend on the child and on the family, and it's important that we actually engage with the family with this as well. So we've got that moving forward.
Thank you, Chair. Very kind.
You're welcome. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Sue and Gavin, for that. Colleagues, apologies, I am like a little bit of a peacock, just peeking my head over the top, but I just want to check if there are any other questions in relation to this item. If you can show me your hand, I think that may be easier, because what I've realised is that I'm not actually on the chair's microphone because it's not working, so hence that's why we have to sort of pause and just wait. Yeah. Right. It's not showing me on the screen because I'm not on that one that there's any hand up for Lawrence. So it's down there. Okay. So what I'll do, colleagues, if that's okay, I'll bring Lawrence in first, and then I'm going to just have to call you out then, if that's all right, then to come in with questions secondly. Okay, Lawrence, if you come in, if that's okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Chair. What I was wondering was, I suppose, the plan that we are referring to, will that detail and address the areas noted in the report? I see at a couple of points in the report as needing further work to be done or an area for further development. Will it be that level of granularity in the plan that you are putting together at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely it will. The plan is very detailed as it stands at the moment, and what we want to make sure is that it's practical. But it absolutely will address any of the areas that are highlighted by Estin, but it does cover the areas that I've mentioned in the report too. Yeah.
So I assume then that would contain the expected outcomes that we would want.
Yeah, absolutely. The focus of the plan will include what you would expect, elements around teaching and learning, elements around leadership and management, elements around inclusion, elements around bespoke packages, working with schools, communication. The report will, the plan encapsulates all of that. Okay,
thank you, Gavin. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you, Lawrence, and apologies getting used to this system for it was remiss of me not to see you there. So, okay, look, I'm going to take this in order of who I can see, if that's okay. So, Anna, I'm going to call you in first of all with your questions, if that's all right.
Thank you. Firstly, just in relation to what Jeff referred to in terms of outcomes and the intention to get pupils back into mainstream education. If this is not achieved by Key Stage 4, how do outcomes for those educated other than at school compare with the mainstream cohort at GCSE level?
Mixed. Pupils that are on. I think if you compare this cohort with mainstream pupils as an average, it's probably not the right comparison. Certainly, if you look at the progress pupils have made before they've come into either tuition or the PRU with their outcomes, they've made greater than expected progress. So at the level that they've come into the PRU, they've then made progress. Sue may be better placed in terms of talking about the outcomes more generally.
Thank you. If you look historically, we didn't get good outcomes for the children that were on tuition or the children that were in the PIU or in AOTIS before the PIU was set up. The children are getting outcomes. They also work with the Inspire to Achieve team and with the NEAT team, and they do have destinations. So whether they go into level 1, whether they're going on to level 1 courses in the college, or whether they're going on to some form of employment or apprenticeship, they have got destination data. So that for us has been a success of the PIU and tuition, actually making it more structured and ensuring that these children and young people who are very vulnerable and a mainstream education hasn't served them well, but we are giving them a destination for future employment and for future education.
Sorry. Thank you. Is there currently capacity available or sufficient capacity available within the PIU or on special tuition for those who need it?
The simple answer is yes. The PRU operates foundation phase, key stage 2, 3 and 4, and tuition can operate in that range as well if it needs to. I don't think we've ever had, Sue can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we've ever had a pupil in foundation phase on tuition. So it's largely the tuition element will be toward key stage 3, 4, largely. Although obviously if there are medical needs at someone in key stage 2, then that will be addressed through some home tuition type provision.
Thank you. And looking specifically at children who in mainstream school would be eligible for free school meals, are you aware that, or rather, do you believe that children in this section of children education other than a school, so I'm not getting my head around the acronym, is there a higher percentage of children eligible for free school meals within this cohort of children?
Yeah, I mean, Sue alluded to the fact that they're vulnerable. I think I put in the report that they're some of our most vulnerable pupils. There would be a higher than average number with free school meals. There'll be a higher number of average those that would have statements or have additional learning needs. So yes is the answer.
Thanks. And for children on special tuition, do they continue to receive access to a free meal while on special tuition or on a reduced timetable?
No, because they're not actually in a mainstream school, and they're actually at home. So they're not in school. They're not being educated in school, so they wouldn't be received, and they wouldn't be entitled. They wouldn't be entitled to that. Anthony is the person to ask for the regulations. He can quote you the regulations, and if you wanted a more detailed answer, I can make sure that comes after the meeting. Anna, would that help?
Thanks. Thanks for confirming that. So I suppose my question on that, and if Anthony's the best person, that's fine, but whether there's a risk that these children, who, as you said, are already vulnerable, are further disadvantaged by not receiving that meal?
It's something that we discuss with the parents as when they actually go on to tuition. So I whilst during COVID they had access, because obviously Welsh Government were paying for all pupils EFSM to actually have free school meals, but it's not part of our statutory duty if they're not in full-time education.
Thank you. Chair, could I ask then, in line with the recommendation of 2.1 of this report, that we ask to be provided to this committee an outline of the costs that would be required to provide that support towards children who currently, if they were in mainstream school, would be eligible for a free school meal?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Williams-Price. What we'll do is, there is another question that I've had from our co-opted member who gave us apologies today around costs and value for money. So if we embed it within that, and I think then from one of our officers, Anthony Lewis, we may be able to get sort of the legislative duty around that as well, so that I'll answer us. So I'll put that as an action if that's okay, and we can bring that back to another scrutiny committee, or certainly get that information out to colleagues as well. Is that okay? Lovely, thank you. Okay, I'll go over to Councillor Claire Jones down there, and then Jamie Scriven. Is that okay? Thank you.
First, I'd like to thank you for writing the report and bringing it forward. And I'd like to thank all that are involved in education other than in school, because I know myself how hard it is. It's a thankless job. And I appreciate all your efforts. I have got a question. So with COVID, obviously there were quite a few pupils who enjoyed not going to school, but some thrived using a hybrid system. So have you considered for some individuals who have not been able to go back into the school environment, have you considered using a hybrid system for them, because they are on target for GCSEs? Because I know my neighbour's granddaughter, she's just passed her GCSEs, never went to school, but through the 2 years of COVID and having the hybrid lessons, she thrived and she achieved. So I was wondering whether that was something you could consider, because they have got a bit complacent in being away from the school settings. Also, I was wondering, have you noticed with the referrals, you've got the referral teams in, but have you noticed that the requests are going up as well? Yes, I can.
Firstly, can I thank you for your thanks? And if it's okay, I'll pass that on to the Prue and the staff in special tuition. It is a really hard job, and you know, they do incredible work with a really difficult group of pupils, and so I know they'll appreciate that, because you know, yeah, it's a lot of hard work. In terms of other aspects of the question, yes, referrals have gone up. The two things have gone up. One, the number, and two, the complexity. And we're seeing that around this group of pupils that are sort of more in the tendency to disengage with education. But we're also seeing that more broadly across additional learning needs and vulnerable learners. More generally, the complexity is growing up. There was the middle point, and I've forgotten it. What was the middle question?
So it was about
the digital element. Yeah. Sue will pick up on the one aspect of that, but we're having discussions with. It's interesting that a number of companies have kind of popped up over or as a response to the pandemic around that digital agenda. And I've had discussions with a couple of those around the innovations that they're looking at and have potentially available. I would suggest that the majority of their solutions and the solutions that are out there relate more to pupils being able to access mainstream from afar, rather than access something like Prue or tuition provision. So it's about, okay, the technology to embed, you know, a robot or something or other that enables that pupil to engage and participate in a lesson with their mainstream peers. So it's definitely something that we're having discussions that we're looking at, and I know other local authorities are doing the same. More widely in terms of the digital online agenda, I'll hand over to Sue.
Gavin, I think. I think what we, it's something that we do need to consider, because we do know that the children thrived. A number of the children on reduced timetables, and this was one of the things that Estin picked up, was they're only having X number of hours a week or X number of hours a day. So in the work with our with the secondary colleagues, and actually even with not so much with primary, because children need more support, it's actually looking at what digital offer could be given to those children to actually enhance what they're having. So it wouldn't be a full face online, because we do also have to have children engaging and socializing, because that's part of education. That's part of the curriculum, is actually socializing and getting on with your peers and sort of developing those relationships. But it's a conversation to have with the secondaries, the secondary head teachers, that if you have a child on tuition, can you offer them a hybrid learning, or can you offer them something, especially if they're on tuition for anxiety? With behavior, it's slightly different, because you've got to manage it. It depends on the reason why they're on tuition, or why they're on special, or why they're on reduced timetables. What we've got to do is take the positives from the pandemic and learn from them and develop them, and not say, okay, they happened in the last 2 years, we forget about them now and we go back to as it was. No, we take the positives, but that's a conversation to have with the secondary head teachers as part of the conversation that we're already having, to see how we can develop the offer further.
Thank you both. I really appreciate your answers, and what you've just said, Sue, ties into my next question that I had, because I've got a concern with the reduced timetables, because I've actually written reduced timetable with what lessons are actually being covered, because I'm aware of a pupil that I'm dealing with at the moment. They only asked for an hour, and like I've said, an hour a day is not sufficient for anything. I don't understand what you're going to be learned. So what are we looking at within the reduced timetable? What hours are we working? What lessons are being taught? Is it just, maths, English, or or others being brought in as well, because as far as I'm concerned, a reduced timetable is needed for some individuals, granted, but like I've tried to explain to a young person lately, you are missing out on the best years. You don't think it until you leave school, and then once you leave school, you think, I've just missed out on the best years of my life. And I was just wondering what it actually looks like, a reduced timetable, please. Thank you.
I think you summed it up really well. It's, you know, for some pupils, it's intended. Reduced timetables are intended to be short term, and they're intended to be, you know, there isn't a stipulation that says they can't be longer, for example, than 4 weeks. But the stipulation is that at 4 weeks there should be a review. Now, you know, we consider that probably 2 weeks too long, which is why, you know, with those that are on tuition, we ensure that that's reviewed on a fortnightly basis. But reduced timetables, the school will come up with that plan, and they'll then have that discussion with us. We'll agree that it's appropriate or not, back and forward a little bit. But at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. 1 hour is very limiting, and 2 hours at key stage, you know, 4 is also limiting. There's only a certain amount you can cover in that time. I would say, in addition, though, it's intensive. So actually what you get from 2 hours is slightly more than you might get if they're just, you know, in school for that length of time, because it's 1-to-1. However, for some of these pupils that are struggling with that idea of education, it's not ideal there. So we know it's a priority. We know it's something that we need to focus on and get better at. We know that we're already working to look at, and we've worked, so for example, over the last couple of weeks with 2 of our comps, we've looked at packages of support that are school-based, that involve an element of tuition, but also involve accessing the school, that also involve a little bit of off-site provision, and basically saying, okay, traditionally this would be a pupil that would go onto tuition for 2 hours a day, and they might be there for a while. We don't know. We don't want that anymore. We want to come up with ways with the schools, working with the schools, where we can say, okay, collectively, what can we do for this pupil? And how can we meet their need? And so we've started to, and it's been really successful, actually, the discussions with 2 of the 4 comps. And it's only been 2 because those are where the pupils have been that we've had the discussions about. But we'll be just having the similar discussions as well with the others. Let's create that package. How can the local authority support the school in, 1, creating that package, 2, supporting it, funding it, adding to it, involving educational psychology or the school wellbeing team? How can we look at what vocational opportunities there might be depending on their age? So we're very clear that tuition as a 1 hour or 2 hour a day provision is not ideal, and we want it to be as limited as possible. And what we want to do is start working more creatively with the schools and with the budgets that we have available to address needs and keep them in the school, and with a package that's built around the school, rather than somehow move the pupil out of school, where there's a disconnect forms really, really quickly. So that's the kind of the direction of travel, not just in response to what Estin have said to us, but just practically it makes sense.
You're welcome. Thank you both for that. Thank you, Councillor Jones. I'm going to go to Councillor Scriven next, to Jamie, and then I'm going to come to my Vice Chair, Councillor Gareth Lewis, if that's okay. So, Jamie.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I did actually originally have 6 separate questions, but there might be less, because I think when colleagues have been asking things, you might have answered some of them. So going back to the family liaison officer, and I know you've touched on this, but how does the family liaison officer link with other services then to create that team around the family approach, supporting the young people into mainstream education? I'm just wondering, we've made mention to working with the family in the school, but how do they work with other services as well?
Thank you for the question. It's a developing model. The funding went into the tuition provision in June or July. The driving force for it initially was the fact that we were seeing a number of pupils disengaging with either tuition or disengaging with the work that was being done to encourage them back into mainstream. And so what we needed to do was add capacity to kind of support that model. Longer term, absolutely, there's definitely a role the traditional family liaison officer role is not just, you know, education. It is about the wider services and how you can bring that together. But initially, it's addressing a need to engage with the families and the schools and with the pupils and with the staff of the tuition service to re-engage those pupils and get that direction of travel a bit more solid.
That's great, thank you. So that will probably come on to my next question now, because I think we've covered, I was going to ask one around Pen-y-Drefer, it's been covered by Jeff. And this ties up nicely then. So in section, and I saw my notes in the way of the number 5. Oh, sorry, am I back on now? Don't know what happened there. Sorry, so if I go back over that again, section 5.15, and I've highlighted the paragraph, and it says a number of the 111 pupils on a reduced timetable for more than 4 weeks, thus requiring a review to take place to look at the needs of the pupil, the appropriateness of the placement, the support required, or the need for a multi-agency approach, which is what we've just been talking about. So I was just going to ask, what multi-agency support do we consider before we reach that 4-week notice? And obviously from the conversation we've had just now about the liaison officer, is the focus is family and school initially, and long term, yes, looking at that. But are there cases where early intervention is more suitable to increase that offer of support, information and guidance to the learners at an appropriate time? I'm just wondering, are we always waiting in every case for 4 weeks to review that, or are there options beforehand?
Yeah, absolutely right. I think we just have to clarify that there are reduced timetables for pupils that are on tuition in the PRU and in mainstream. And again, the majority of pupils that are on reduced timetables are from mainstream. So the connectivity is a little bit more straightforward there because they'll already have engagement with services around them. Fundamentally, just need to be careful how I word this. We need to make sure that less pupils are on reduced timetables and that those that are accessing more and are getting back into education quicker. Now, that's easy to say, but it's actually harder in practice because of the needs of the pupils. But what we do know is that it's a long time ago where education by itself could solve an issue, or that children's services by themselves could solve an issue. That element of multi-service working together with health, with CAMS, with the agencies that need to be around the table with Shine to actually make any difference and to move things along. That's where we are now. So my drive, my focus isn't purely to kind of keep the numbers down somehow. It's to how do we make sure that the provision that we're putting in is appropriate to the needs of the pupil, but ultimately to ensure that them being in mainstream will provide them with the best opportunities to succeed, as long as that's scaffolded by appropriate services if it's necessary. Does that kind of answer the question, or? Okay.
Hope I don't get turned off again now. Right, so my next point was around 5.16, because I know you've obviously outlined the main reasons the reduced timetables were in place or monitored. And what I wanted to ask was, in what ways are we dealing with behavioural issues? So, like what support are families getting to deal with those, and how would you define behavioural issues? Because there can be a variety of different ways of defining behavioural issues. Just for our understanding, what does that mean?
Yeah, well, the traditional definition around behaviour is social, emotional, and behavioural needs. Some people spin the letters around. I know in England they've moved away from that phraseology to more the mental health and well-being. I think in my mind, and when we're discussing these pupils, there are so many blurry lines between anxiety and behaviour and learning difficulties and mental health that actually we're trying to move away from a rigid criteria where, okay, they meet that criteria on behavior, but not so much on that. And overall, what do we think? Okay, to actually holistically say, let's just look at the pupil, let's look at their needs, but also let's look at the circumstances of the families, look at the engagement with other agencies, and try and take that much more forensic approach to working out what provision pupils need. So behavior would be largely identified as pupils exhibiting behaviours in school that make it difficult for them to access, or for the school to educate them or the wider school community.
That's great, thank you. So just coming back on that, one of the things I wanted to ask then was around the Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 that are on reduced timetables. Is that a common priority with those pupils that is for behavioural needs? If that makes sense.
It's a great way to communicate, isn't it? It is a mixed bag, and we know that if we went back 3 years, I think what we would see is much more clarity around these are behaviours and this is an attendance issue. But I think that the rise of the number of pupils that are just struggling with their mental health and around anxiety and around school post pandemic has changed the landscape a little bit, and has to a certain extent changed the way that we manage those pupils who's desperate to jump in. So I'll let her.
Picking up on a question earlier where you talk about that, there are children that missed out on transition. Those whole transitions going into secondary schools. So so they've gone from perhaps year 4, right? They didn't have full-time education in year 5 and year 6, and suddenly their next experience of education is in a big, massive secondary school where they're going from one class to another class to another class to another class. They've had 2 years at home. They are really struggling, and I think what we found is the high number of referrals actually in Key Stage 3 in year 7, because of the young people's confusion and inability to manage in a very different system. Whereas when you'd had transition, you had that opportunity to get used to the school, to even get used to some of those teachers. So it's that has really exacerbated the issues for Key Stage 3 and 4. Now, secondary schools are aware of it, and we're working very closely with them to actually address their curriculum. The new curriculum should help, because the curriculum for Wales is a very different curriculum, and it is more holistic. It does link sort of subject areas, but I think that's certainly what we found. Talking to Gavin, high numbers of year 7 and 8, and our number of year 9s this year that are on tuition for anxiety. We haven't seen that before. This is post-pandemic. This is what we have to support these young people with and the families with as we actually come out of the pandemic. So I think we're going to see a rise for a while before we actually sort of this tailors off as we actually come out of the pandemic. It isn't, it's left us with a legacy that we have to manage.
No, thank you both for that, and I appreciate that it's a holistic issue. This is what other authorities are reporting as well. We've got in that COVID period young people that perhaps have not been to theatre performances, different things they would have experienced at that age as they're coming up and growing up, that they haven't had swimming lessons and things. And this isn't just an issue related to our area. This is Wales-wide. So it's good to know that we're in the same boat, and it's not that we've got a specific behavioural issue. That's why I wanted to ask that question. I'm pointed to 5.19. But then we've got the example of provisions that we undertake for those that are in the PRU and etc. And I know that we've touched on this slightly, but what I wanted to ask was, again, going back to what success that we have in regards to these provisions that are put on place. Specifically, different things like perhaps have we got young people that have joined youth service staff since being involved in some of the provisions, or have they gone on to join military college? Have they been taken on by apprenticeships with the project? I'm just wondering, have we got specific case studies where we can say, yes, that's happening and there's success measures in that way then?
One of the young children from the PRU last year, as you would be aware, Jamie, won an award in the Academy of Success, and that was as a result of some of the work that had been done through Dowlais Community Centre with the PRU, which that meant that young child felt confident enough to go and volunteer in Dowlais Community Centre, and then has taken that forward. And he was accessing increased mainstream as well, but then something else has happened in his in the background as well. So there's certainly sort of there've been some successes there. And actually, when we're looking at access to Merthyr College, some of them, the link with Merthyr College has meant that they have gone on to level 1. Not saying level 2, but they've gone on to level 1 qualifications or apprenticeships. The EE project is very new. It's part of the work that was done very successfully with CLAR pupils, and we're actually sort of rolled it out now with tuition pupils this year, and it's actually looking at, and hopefully that'll be a 2-year program, which again could lead to apprenticeships for some of those young people moving forward. So yes, we have got some. And actually, if you look at that additional literacy intervention and you look at the outcomes that some of those young people had at the end of last year, that's as a result of the additional literacy interventions.
That's great. Thanks for that, Sue. I think I'm on my last one now, so you'll be happy to know that. 6.3. Obviously, there's mention to looking at alternative range of provision and things that we can offer, expanding that offer that we've currently got. Do we have an idea what these additional options could look like? And I've just got like different examples that I can think of, like perhaps working with local services provide something that's not currently available. I know that some authorities do things like safe spaces with COVID and trauma-induced experiences as they are, which we've been discussing. So they run things via the youth service like mindfulness programs, and I know they've been working with State of Mind on this to deliver that. And we're quite lucky that we've had that funding through now for the Snakes and Ladders project, so perhaps there's opportunities there to do things. So I'm just wondering what does that range look like at the moment? Have we got an idea what we possibly could offer in future?
It's a developing picture for sure. We know with the redevelopment of the PRU onto the primary site that there's space there. We're keen to explore, you know, the potential for some workshopping at the back of the site, and you know those traditional kind of construction, and some of those kind of areas. I'm meeting actually with Cardiff and Caerphilly, on Wednesday to discuss alternative and vocational provision with them. There are some opportunities of companies that they're working with that are looking to branch out where they locate themselves, and have very much advocated that, you know, we want to be part of that discussion. So it is a developing picture. It's definitely an area where we know that there will be growing need, that there'll be pupils whose, you know, the best opportunity can be provided through that kind of range of options and opportunities for them to access. So it's tricky because we're not that big as a borough, and I know that there are bigger councils that are struggling with some of these areas in more ways than we are, actually, in terms of the offer. But all I can say is we're you know, we're very much committed to providing that range of provision, because we know that there are pupils that need it now, and that there's going to be a growing number in the future. That will be an element of kind of homegrown. We're really keen for the PRU to you know, be able to accommodate in the future some of those aspects, but we're also keen to develop bespoke packages with schools. Hopefully this time next year, you know, maybe we could come back and we can talk in detail more about, or have an informal discussion around some of those aspects. So I haven't got a full answer for you in terms of what the range will look like. What I know is that we want to see mainstream schools accessing it. We want to see the PRU accessing it and running some of it, managing some of it. We want to see pupils that are on tuition or on reduced timetables, absolutely, where it's appropriate, engaged in that, because it's rounding out the package of education for them. Sue's got some elements to add.
I was just going to pick up on the Snakes and Ladders. We're currently in the development phase for that. The Snakes and Ladders, which is the other pandemic, which is what we've had lottery funding for, and this is maybe something that you want to pick up in a future scrutiny meeting, is very much led by young people. It isn't led by officers. It's very difficult. We've got to sit on our hands and we're not allowed to say anything, but it is very much led by young people, which is why we had the money, because they were absolutely superb when they went in front of the lottery committee. And as I say, we're currently in the development phase. That'll finish next March, and then we'll have a plan for actually delivering that. So again, that might be something that you want to consider at this committee, as to how we're actually taking that forward, and actually ask some questions of the young people that have been part of it and part of that development phase, because they've been really inspirational. And they were talking to, this is an aside, sorry, they were talking to the Director of Education from Welsh Government on Saturday at our Shemairament event. And he was blown away by their level of confidence and what they were talking about. So I think we can be rightly proud of what they're doing, and I'm sure that they will come out with a really good plan when they finish the current development phase.
I'll just add one more element in there. I think we have to just be realistic as well that none of these elements are cheap. That we just have to recognise the fact that, which is why it's in the recommendation, there's the mention of identifying priorities for potential budget planning, because creating quality vocational provision, either internally or accessing external providers, is never free. And so we just need to bear that in mind, that in developing those things, that there is a cost implication for us.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was just going to ask in regards to 6.3 then, could we arrange to possibly bring that up as an update to a future committee, given that it's a relevant item under where we want to be in the future?
So colleagues, what I think I'll do, if you will allow me, is I think there is an element of that. There's an element of, obviously, Sue has touched upon the Eston report on Gavin not being published till late November. And there's also an element of, the value for money and the budgetary need for the department for this particular provision. So I think what we'll do is in my summing up and my conclusions, if that's okay, I'll touch upon it there, and then we can talk about that then in the forward work plan and at a latter part, including snakes and ladders as well, if that's okay. Okay, so what I'm going to do is Councillor Claire Jones has another question. I'm going to come to my vice chair though. Oh, my vice chair's okay now. I think everything's been answered, Gareth. There's been some excellent questioning this afternoon. So I think what's happened is a number of those questions have been asked. So Councillor Claire Jones, did you want to come back? You had a comment or a question?
Thank you for allowing me to come back in. Firstly, can I just say, on the point of snakes and ladders, is there a possibility that we can actually meet with the young people? Because I'd like to hear what they've got to put in place, because I've never heard of it before, and I've sat here and I'm quite enthralled of what they've put forward. So if we're unable to meet with young people, can I meet with yourself so I can just see what has been put forward to date? It sounds really interesting. So thank you. That would be good.
Yeah, so working with Sue and obviously our cabinet member and Gav as well, I think what we'll do is Jane and I will liaise together with my vice chair, Councillor Gareth Lewis, and we'll just look at when we could have an opportunity really to invite the young people in, which I think would be good, and they can share that with us then. So
might be worth having a workshop rather than a formal meeting, just have a workshop where you can, and they can, I think it would be wonderful for you to actually hear the presentation that got them the bid, because I think that's to see what they did and then where they've gone now. Do you want me to liaise with Chloe and see what we can, Jan, see what we can do?
thank you. Okay, colleagues. But fire away, Councillor Jones.
I'm never normally vocal, so I do apologise. Right, can I go to 6.1 with the best start of life? The best start to life. I've looked at that, and obviously during COVID, behaviours change, not only for children but their parents as well. Obviously some children throughout COVID had found behaviours from their parents they'd never met before. So when you're saying best start of life, and it does state that the provision is fit for purpose with staff unable to meet the needs of the pupils who require such provision, I understand PRU, the staff are trauma trained, but are we looking at staff that are fully trauma trained to deal with any issues that go on to do with the best start of life? Because we are looking at the child in general with this, and we are seeing that their needs are met. So I was just wondering, are the staff trauma trained, and are they trained in dealing with any new disclosures that's been taking place? Because that could be part of the behaviour why the child does not want to attend school, and it's part of the issue. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes to all the questions. More broadly on that, we wanted to make sure that all our schools were trauma informed, and so we've offered all our schools access to both the whole school training, but also the diploma training for individual members of staff to access. Some schools already are trauma informed. Some schools are involved with Nurture UK, Nurture International, and a couple of schools actually wanted to do both. But our drive was absolutely this is a need for all our schools and our specialist provisions, whether it's resource bases, PRU, special school tuition. So yes, funding has been made available for them all to access trauma informed schools, and we're also monitoring to make sure that obviously, you know, that needs to be walked out, that approach as well. So it isn't just we've had the training, all our staff are aware of it. It's actually, okay, how is that reflected in how you are managing complexity in the school?
Thank you for that, because obviously with my line of work, we've only been had a pandemic, you know, people have been in the house with their parents. They're potentially, with lessons that are going to come up, especially with the new RSE, there potentially could be disclosures, and you know, it may be then that we'll find out that the child has had these issues and behaviours and not gone to school because, you know, and I just wanted to ensure for the staff as well. I mean, hearing a disclosure isn't it's not pleasant at all, definitely not pleasant for the child, but it's good to know the staff are fully trained to be able to and equipped to deal with situations like this. So thank you ever so much, it's really appreciated.
Yeah, I was just going to add that in terms of our soon to be appointed education safeguarding officer as well, that will be their agenda entirely, is that it will be so, you know, obviously leading on safeguarding, but working with the schools, but then also those broader safeguarding issues like reduced timetables, anti-bullying, exclusions, those things that impact upon that agenda, that will all sit with that one person, not solely, because it's a lot to do, but in terms of us having someone to spearhead and ensure that like the areas that you've touched on are very clearly represented and owned by the local authority.
You're welcome. Thank you. Okay, colleagues, if you may indulge me for a second, our colleague, our cooperative member, wasn't able to attend today, and also, by the way, just for accuracy, we did have late apologies from another cooperative member, Liz McLean, so she did apologise that she couldn't attend. However, Paul had asked some really pertinent questions. They have been covered by colleagues, so well done, some fantastic questions this afternoon. But there is some really good aspects of his questioning around value for money and costs. What I'm mindful of is that within the body of report, there aren't actually any financial you know, statements or financials within the body of the report. So if colleagues will allow, what I may do is just send these to officers, because I think in our summary and conclusion today, we're going to see that maybe some additional information will be brought back at some point. So if I share this with Sue and Gavin and our cabinet member, and then maybe we could receive that information at a later date, if that's okay. I'm just mindful because the recommendation says the priorities need to be considered in developing budget proposals. So I think this would actually help the team, and I'll just touch upon them. Paul was asking about total costs in certain periods and academic years, and then unit cost students at the PRU, and obviously comparative costs as well, you know, with any other local authorities and cross consortia areas as well. So I think they're really good questions, but if that's okay with you, I'll share them with you, officers, and our cabinet member, and then we can get some feedback when I do summary and conclusions. Is that okay? Yeah, I can see Lawrence nodding as well. Okay, colleagues, are there any comments or observations before I just summarise the report and we come to that final recommendation? Councillor Jamie Scriven.
Yeah, I just like to make a comment to Claire's question. It didn't really strike me at first when I was looking through the report, but 6.1, that's so important about we have an approach to the trauma impact on young people and how we support them, and especially their families as well, as part of a whole school approach as well. I've come from a household myself that has had its fair share of trauma through the pandemic and that period through COVID. And I went through grief counselling and things myself in order to support myself with work and employment. But you're still going back into a household environment where there's perhaps 3 or 4 other people within that family that are still experiencing it. As a young person, as a child going through that, that's incredibly difficult. Even if we're putting the right support in for the child, there's still that environment they're going back to every day. We've got the mainstream education, which is great if we can get all young people into that environment, but they're still going back home into that area where they experienced that trauma as a passive form of trauma then from other members of their family. So that's really important. I'm really glad you brought that up, Claire, and you were asking questions around that. And I just wanted to make comment to that, Chair, how important it is that we get that whole school approach model right as well, that we're not just supporting the young person, we're supporting the whole family to engage with the school and make sure that we're getting that best start to life for the young person with the full support of the family as well.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Scriven. Yeah, absolutely, undoubtedly, because we've talked about ACEs and everything as well previously, you know, so there is this body of support there, but I'll just bring Sue in to make some comments in relation to that.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I think if we're looking at the community focused schools approach as well, that's going to help us with a lot with actually bringing those families together with that work that we're actually doing in the North Cluster and in the BC, the BCA, Penedre and the BCA cluster. We've got schools in the Southern Cluster now that are actually looking at aspects of community, how they can engage with the community. So that whole community focused schools agenda will ensure that we've got those closer working relationships with children's services and with families to make sure that we are hopefully addressing those agenda items. You mentioned family liaison officers earlier. We've got family engagement officers in the North Cluster and in a couple of other schools. We're going to take it not just be with the school community, but look at that wider community as well to see how we can support those families and make closer links.
Thank you, Sue. Okay, colleagues, the recommendations in the report ask us to, the recommendations are that we as scrutiny members discuss and comment on the issues set out in the report and identify priorities which may need to be considered in developing budget proposals. So just in summary then, from some of my notes that I've made from your questions and comments from the officers as well. I mean, first and foremost, it was already touched upon, but I think this scrutiny committee certainly wants our officers, Gav, Sue, and our cabinet member to just feedback that we do recognise the complexity, of, supporting our young people within the AOTUS provision, within the PRU provision, and certainly the support that's needed for that young person, as well as the teaching staff and the support staff there as well, So, please let them know that we do recognise that certainly, and as a scrutiny, anything that can come of this scrutiny in order to support that provision will be absolutely supported. So I think as far as some priorities, we talk specifically about Key Stage 4 and how important that is. I'm going to pop up now so you can see me. We talk about Key Stage 4 and how important that is. But of course, Gavin has also mentioned some of those complexities around that transition, and Sue did as well, around that Key Stage 3. So I think that's something that we support officers on and mindful of, that we need to perhaps pick up in a future report. I think there's that mainstream turnaround, isn't there? That is the vision and the objective, if you like, is that we do get young people back into mainstream education as and when is appropriate for them, considering some of those other complexities that we talked about, perhaps around, their own issues and support that's needed as a wraparound support for the families as well. And then, of course, there's the senior support staff as well, senior management staff, in order to support those to take these forward. And then I think it was Gavin as well as Sue talked about that forward plan. And then inevitably any feedback that the department and the PRU was received in line with the ESTIN recommendations. Okay, so I think those sort of all rolled up into a couple of key priorities there, and then of course added to that value for money but budgetary pressures and needs for the department moving forward. I think they would be the priorities that we've touched upon and discussed today, and then we can look at a forward work plan in order to bring some of that back, so we can see some of those forward plan objectives moving forward, what the ESTIN report recommendations are, and of course then the budget moving forward as well. So we'll agree where that sits in the forward plan, because inevitably the team will need time to embed that and take those recommendations forward as well. Is that okay in summary, colleagues? Are you happy to vote and support that recommendation at 2.1? I'll look for a show of hands, and Lawrence, if you can raise your hand on the screen, if that's okay, if you're happy to support those recommendations. Yeah. Lawrence, you okay? Can you hear me? Can you just show me your hand? You okay? Oh, you're a star. Thank you, Lawrence. Okay. So those recommendations have been supported and taken forward. Colleagues, can I thank you so much for this afternoon? I know there was some pretty grueling, tough questions there, but so important. So Gavin, thank you. Sue, thank you. Cabinet Member Michelle Jones, can I thank you as well? And you're free to leave us now for the rest of the agenda if you so wish. Thank you. I'll just give you a minute or two. Okay, colleagues. Well, first and foremost, thank you for that. I think there was some excellent scrutiny and some excellent scrutinising of that report and the departments and everything. And there's some key objectives really for us as a committee to move forward. I'm going to have to get a booster seat next time I'm here, I think, because I can't quite see everybody. Ah, bless you. Okay. Okie doke. Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Tivy. I'm not sure if everybody heard it because obviously there wasn't a mic, but Councillor Tivy has asked if we could just think about the seating areas for next time we have scrutiny, just because we're popping our heads above the screens to see who's actually here, so that we'll take that forward. Okay. Colleagues, agenda item number 5 are report recommendations, and obviously this is something new that we've looked at as a scrutiny committee, and it's to really question ourselves and reflect on the meeting and ask ourselves, you know, did we really feel that we addressed the recommendations in any agenda items today, specifically this one on the AOTAS provision, and have we as a scrutiny added value? So if I may kick off, if that's okay with you. I think there's still some work to be done. I think we asked some really pertinent questions there of the officers, really dig deep as well. So well done on that. But I think there is still some work to be done, because where we find ourselves with this provision at the moment is that they've just had an Eston inspection, of which we're not privy to that report until I think it is the 29th of November, I noted. So, you know, for us as a scrutiny committee, I think we'll need to take this forward in the forward work plan and specifically look at some key areas, the budgetary element of it, yes, the financials. What does this provision need? What is it working with at the moment? Is that providing value for money? The Eston recommendations, and how do they lead into the forward plan for the ALN provision, the AOTAS provision with the PRU? Is that a fair assumption of this afternoon's meeting and the summary of it? Jeff Beard.
Thank you. Yeah, I think what you're saying is fair. Just to add the point that by the very nature that we're a scrutiny committee, we have reports and information that is several months out of date by its very nature. If we can look at Eston report, which is the latest independent report in this particular area, within a reasonable period of time, it does give us a better grasp. It gives the committee members more understanding of what's happening here and now, or at least in the previous 3 months or something like that. Whereas we're looking at other reports that say it's 9 months, it's 12 months, it's 15 months. So if we could do that on a more regular basis, Chair, where we can get access to the information, not so much historical, it would be, I feel, of a lot more value than we are at the current state.
Thank you, Jeff. Just bear with me. I'm working off my laptop just to have sight of the forward work plan at the moment, so I can just see what we've got coming to us next. Okay, so look, the Eston report is the 29th of November. We do need to give them time, even though they would have had sight and had feedback directly from the lead inspector, from the HMI. So I'm looking at sort of New Year, and let's just see how that's looking at the moment. So 23rd of January, then we're looking at new curriculum, and 6th of March is a big one, that's ALN and inclusion. So what I may suggest is, after we talk to Sue and Gavin, obviously with our support officer Jane, is that we may have something outside of the normal scrutiny committee. You know, it doesn't always have to be brought to committee as such. We may have a workshop on it and taking that forward, or you know, a separate meeting outside of it just to present those findings to us, and then we can scrutinise it within the forward work plan if time allows. So if that's okay with you, Gareth and I will take a look at it, see when we can possibly get that report to us. If we can fit it into that 23rd of January scrutiny, then we'll ask for it to be done then. But I'll update you ASAP. Is that okay? Okay, thank you. The other thing as well then that we touched upon that we'll perhaps have as a workshop with young people, and to those scrutiny members that are available. Lawrence, sorry, I can see your hand up. I'm looking now, Lawrence. I'm looking. Jump in.
No, I was just going to echo perhaps what Jeff has said, and you've touched on as well. I think the timing needs to be understood better because, as you said, in some ways this report is a little bit premature because of, you say, the Eston report and also the budget implications that potentially, as I said, that perhaps needs to be considered in future. There's perhaps something to be borne in mind.
Yeah, absolutely, Lawrence, noted, and thank you for that feedback as well. As I said, the other consideration really is to have a workshop on the Snakes and Ladders project at some point as well. So we'll add that to our notes chain if that's okay. And then, colleagues, we move on to agenda item number 6, which is feedback on scrutiny activities, any outstanding actions, etc. Well, on the 12th of September, we had our community focused school workshop. We did a SWOT analysis. I felt it was a lots of value, to be honest with you. A lot sort of gleamed from that. And then we included our feedback within the body of a report that went to council on the 5th of October. And of course, we can pick that up then at a future date as well as to how effective it is and you know, giving it an opportunity to be embedded. We have the ALN Task and Finish group that's established, and Lawrence kindly is going to chair that one for us, and then we'll receive feedback when, as and when that happens. And school visits have now been organised for us to go out to a number of schools to discuss the new curriculum with those, and then we can bring that back and feed that to the scrutiny committee again, as and when that is appropriate. Agenda item number 7, any other business deemed urgent by myself? Well, scrutiny referrals is sometimes an item that's deemed urgent. I haven't had a specific scrutiny referral. A co-opted member and I have discussed a matter of concern, but that matter of concern is going to be dealt with directly with our Chief Education Officer. And if need be, the scrutiny will then follow it up. Okay, so I'm not going to disclose what that is at the moment. We're going to follow due process, and if need be, then that matter can be referred back if we so feel. Any other business? I have none. So unless anybody else has got any other business, Jamie Scriven, Councillor Jamie Scriven, I should say. Sorry, Jamie.
That's all right. Thanks, Chair. I just want to ask a quick question. So obviously, we've just recently come into scrutiny, but I was referring to co-opted members. And do we have a young person representative on this committee at the moment?
We used to. We always had one. I think what we'll do is we'll go back out and see. I think it was the change around of some of our co-opted members, especially from MT Boyth, who then moved on from school into the college, and so they weren't joining us on committee. But we'll certainly put that back out there. Is that okay, Jamie? Okay, colleagues, that's it from me as your chair. We have concluded the meeting. Thank you so much for your attendance and bearing with us all as we get used to this new way of working and ordering a couple of booster seats for us. But we'll look at the configuration of the room next time around. Thanks ever so much. I really appreciate it. From me and Gareth, much appreciated, and we shall see you all soon. Thank you.